Give me that car right now. The HOA, Karen screaming in my driveway, was about to make a huge mistake. She threatened to call the cops when I refused to hand over my keys, convinced that God had sent her my vehicle. But here's what she didn't know. There was something about my job that would turn her from confident to terrified in seconds. She had no idea what kind of person she was really threatening. Comment where you're watching from, because the question isn't whether she called the cops. It's what happened when she found out who I actually work for. Let me set the scene for you. It's a peaceful Tuesday morning in my quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Washington, D.C. I'm Larry Roberts, 50 years old, and I have been a federal employee for 25 years. I just moved here 6 months ago after being promoted to federal interior chief. The house was perfect. It had a quiet street, decent neighbors, and was close enough to my office that my commute wouldn't be too long. I had my legitimate government SUV parked in the driveway. But here's the thing. For operational security reasons, I kept my federal identity on a need-to-know basis. The vehicle looked like any other contractor's ride with civilian plates and no obvious federal markings, though internally it had all the proper VINs and asset tags that marked it as government property. I was enjoying what I thought would be a normal morning when I heard footsteps marching across my driveway with the kind of purpose that screams trouble. That's when I saw her, a woman in her late 40s with wild eyes and the kind of determined stride that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. She was clutching what looked like official papers in one hand and pointing at my SUV like it had personally offended her entire family lineage. "That's my compensation car!" she screamed, her voice carrying enough volume to wake half the neighborhood. I nearly choked on my coffee, thinking this had to be some kind of mistake, or maybe a very elaborate prank. But the look in her eyes told me this woman was dead serious, and that realization made my federal training kick into high gear, even though she had no idea who she was really dealing with. Ma'am, this is my work vehicle," I said as calmly as possible, setting down my coffee mug with the deliberate control that comes from decades of dealing with difficult situations. But she wasn't having any of it. "God sent it to replace Mark's vehicle," she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "Federal vehicle killed my husband." Now that caught my attention, because 3 years ago, I had indeed worked on a case involving a federal contractor named Mark Evans, who had supposedly died in a hit-and-run accident. The case file was burned into my memory, because something about it never sat right. We found the contractor's vehicle abandoned near the Mexican border, but the body was never recovered, and the blood evidence was minimal at best. Standing there looking at this unhinged woman, I started connecting dots I really didn't want to connect. "Give me that car as divine justice." Teresa Evans, because that's who this was, though I didn't know her name yet, continued her demands with the fervor of someone who genuinely believed she was on a mission from God. Her wedding ring caught the sunlight as she gestured wildly, and I noticed how worn thin it was from what must have been 3 years of constant twisting. This wasn't just anger, this was grief mixed with desperation, and that combination makes people dangerous in ways you can't predict. "Ma'am, I refuse to give you my car," I replied, keeping my voice level while my mind raced through the implications of what I was seeing. If this were Mark Evans's widow, and she genuinely believed her husband had been killed by a federal vehicle, then my showing up in her neighborhood with what looked like a government SUV was either the world's worst coincidence or karma's idea of a sick joke. The woman's face turned an alarming shade of red as she processed my refusal. "You refuse God's will," she shrieked, pulling out her cell phone with shaking hands. 911, I need to report a man who refuses to give me my compensation car." I watched in fascination and growing concern as she proceeded to lie to emergency dispatch about the situation, claiming that God had sent her a justice vehicle and I was blocking divine will. The dispatcher must have been having the same kind of morning I was having, because I could hear the confusion in their voice even from where I stood. While Teresa paced around my driveway, giving increasingly unhinged statements to the 911 operator, I noticed my neighbors starting to emerge from their houses like prairie dogs sensing danger. Tom Riley from next door was already filming from his window. The guy had more security cameras than a casino, and the nervous energy of someone who had seen too much neighborhood drama. I chatted with him a few times, and learned he was some kind of former federal contractor, which explained why he kept giving my SUV suspicious looks, even though he'd never said anything directly. There was also Mrs. Davis, an elderly woman across the street, who I'd later learned was a retired federal employee, though at the time she was just watching everything with the kind of knowing smile that suggested she recognized something the rest of us missed. Then there was Maria, who lived 2 houses down and always seemed to clutch her purse nervously whenever Teresa's name came up in neighborhood conversations. When Officer Ryan Parker arrived 20 minutes later, I could tell he was the kind of rural jurisdiction cop who probably didn't deal with federal employees on a regular basis. He had that military bearing of someone trying to impress his way into a bigger agency, and when Teresa started showing him what looked like official HOA documents claiming she had seizure authority over my vehicle, I watched his confusion grow in real time. "Ma'am, citizens cannot commandeer vehicles," he told Teresa, with the kind of patience that suggested this wasn't his first crazy call of the week. When he asked to see my registration, I handed over my contractor cover documents, legitimate paperwork created by my agency for exactly this kind of situation, though it made me feel dirty lying to a fellow law enforcement officer. Teresa's righteous conviction was something to behold. Standing there in my driveway, waving her fake papers and invoking both God and community authority, she genuinely believed she was fighting for justice. Mark's spirit demands justice, she declared to Officer Parker, who was clearly wondering what he had done to deserve this assignment. That car represents blood debt payment. I found myself actually feeling sorry for her. Grief can make people believe crazy things, and if she truly thought your husband had been killed by someone like me, who then escaped consequences, her anger made a twisted kind of sense. What she didn't know was that I had Mark Evans's case file memorized, and the truth about her husband's disappearance was going to be far more devastating than anything she could imagine. But what Teresa didn't know was that her beloved Mark had left behind something that would change everything, and I was the only person who had seen his real file. What do you think I should have done when I realized the truth about her husband's death? The next few days brought a masterclass in how grief and desperation can turn a normal person into a document-forging conspiracy theorist. Teresa had apparently decided that if the police wouldn't help her claim what she believed was rightfully hers, she'd create her own legal authority to back up her divine mission. I kid you not, this woman spent what must have been hours crafting the most elaborate fake legal documents I've ever seen outside of a federal fraud case. She used official community letterhead, biblical quotes, and enough legal-sounding language to confuse a first-year law student. The HOA Divine Compensation Order she created looked like it came from someone who had binge-watched legal dramas while Googling property seizure laws. What really got me was watching the neighborhood's reaction to Teresa's newfound documentation. Tom next door was practically wearing grooves in his driveway from pacing back and forth, wiping his hands on that oil-stained rag he always carried, a nervous tick that got worse every time he looked at my SUV's government plates. The guy knew something was off about my contractor story. His background installing GPS systems for federal fleets meant he could spot the subtle differences in my vehicle that most people would miss. But he couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong, and that uncertainty was eating at him. Meanwhile, Mrs. Davis kept giving me these protective little smiles whenever Teresa wasn't looking, like she was guarding some secret that would make everything clear if only she could share it. Maria's guilt was becoming visible to everyone. The woman had taken to clutching her leather purse like it contained state secrets, and every time someone mentioned Teresa's mounting legal expenses, Maria would physically flinch. I started putting two and two together about why a former HOA treasurer might be so nervous around financial discussions, especially when Teresa mentioned spending community money on legal printing costs and consultation fees. The math wasn't hard to do. Someone had been dipping into the community fund, and Maria knew exactly who and how much. When Officer Parker returned to investigate Teresa's latest complaints about my illegal vehicle occupation, he brought with him that same eager energy of someone hoping this might be his ticket to federal attention. Teresa presented her fake HOA documents with the confidence of someone who genuinely believed she'd found a legal loophole, and I watched Parker's face cycle through confusion, skepticism, and professional obligation. Ma'am, these documents seem unusual, he said, studying the papers with the kind of careful attention that suggested he knew something was wrong, but couldn't articulate what. HOAs don't typically have vehicle seizure authority, but Teresa was ready for that objection. My husband's blood demands justice, she declared, with the fervor of someone who had been rehearsing this speech in front of Mark's memorial photo for days. And yes, she had created a full shrine to her dead husband, wedding pictures, candles, and what I later learned was a fake death certificate that looked convincing enough to fool anyone who wasn't specifically looking for fraud indicators. She'd stand in front of that shrine every morning, talking to Mark's picture like he was giving her guidance on her mission to reclaim what the government owed her. The woman had convinced herself this wasn't theft or harassment. This was divine justice with legal backing. Here's what really got under my skin. Teresa's moral justification for everything she was doing. She'd created this entire narrative where I was some low-level government contractor who was part of the same system that had killed her husband and then covered it up. In her mind, taking my car wasn't stealing. It was reclaiming compensation that she'd been wrongfully denied. She'd tell anyone who would listen about how federal employees and contractors were all part of a machine that destroyed families and then hid behind immunity and bureaucracy. The crazy part was, if you didn't know the real story about Mark Evans, her anger almost made sense. The community was splitting along predictable lines. Mrs. Davis would nod politely at Teresa's rants, but shoot me encouraging looks when she thought no one was watching. Tom was caught between his contractor knowledge that told him something was fishy about my story, and his fear of becoming Teresa's next target if he questioned her authority. Maria was slowly being crushed by the weight of whatever secret she was carrying, and Officer Parker was desperately trying to handle a situation that was clearly above his pay grade without admitting he was in over his head. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything for what I knew would eventually become a federal case, while fighting my own internal battle about whether to blow my cover and end this madness. The breaking point came when Teresa announced her intention to hold a legal seizure ceremony, where she would formally transfer my vehicle to her custody in front of the entire community. She'd spent community money, Maria's guilty purse-clutching confirmed this, on printing official-looking transfer documents, and even hired what she claimed was a legal observer to witness the proceedings. The woman had gone full conspiracy theorist, creating an elaborate fantasy where she was the righteous widow fighting government corruption through proper legal channels. What she didn't realize was that every document she created, every claim she made, and every dollar she spent on this delusion was building a federal case against her that would make her husband's disappearance look like a parking ticket. But Tom was about to make a discovery that would either save Teresa from destroying her life completely or shatter her world forever. And that's when Tom made a discovery that would either save Teresa from destroying her life completely or shatter her world forever. But should he tell her the truth, knowing it might break her mind? What would you do if you found out your neighbor's dead husband was actually living it up in another country? 3 o'clock in the morning is when people do their worst thinking, and Teresa Evans had apparently been doing a lot of thinking. Tom's security cameras, and the guy had more surveillance equipment than a federal building, caught the whole thing in high-definition detail. There she was, standing in my driveway in her pajamas and a winter coat, talking to my SUV like it was personally responsible for every tragedy in her life. But this wasn't just talking. This was a full-scale conversation with what she believed was divine guidance, and the conversation was telling her to take direct action. The spray paint can hissed in the darkness as Teresa carefully wrote "Blood Debt" across my SUV's driver's side door in dripping red letters. But here's what made it even more disturbing. She was crying while she did it. "This is for you, Mark," she whispered to the night air, her voice carrying clearly on Tom's audio feed. "Same car type that took you from me. Now it pays the price." She moved with the careful deliberation of someone following a script, puncturing both front tires with a kitchen knife while reciting what sounded like a prayer. The methodical way she smashed my side mirror with a hammer told me this wasn't a crime of passion. This was a planned operation that she'd convinced herself was morally justified. What really got me was the dollar amount of damage she was doing without realizing it. $4,200 worth of destruction to federal property, all caught on camera with audio of her confessing to her motives. But in Teresa's mind, this wasn't vandalism. This was justice. She was claiming compensation that she believed the government owed her, marking territory that she felt belonged to her by divine right. The woman had created such an elaborate mental framework to justify her actions that she genuinely believed she was performing a sacred duty rather than committing federal crimes. When I discovered the damage the next morning, my first thought was professional. This woman had just escalated from harassment to felony destruction of government property. My second thought was human. She was in so much pain that she'd convinced herself destroying my car would somehow honor her husband's memory. Standing there looking at the spray paint still wet in the morning dew, I felt that familiar federal employee mixture of duty and compassion that makes this job both rewarding and heartbreaking. I had to report this to my agency's security office, but I also knew that once federal investigators got involved, Teresa's world was going to implode in ways she couldn't imagine. Tom's discovery happened purely by accident, but it changed everything. The guy was reviewing his overnight security footage, probably hoping to catch whoever had been stealing packages in the neighborhood, when he stumbled across something that made him nearly drop his coffee mug. "Mark Evans, Federal Witness Protection Program," he read from his computer screen, his hands already reaching for that nervous rag in his pocket. "Death faked, currently living in Guadalajara, Mexico, under the identity Marco Valdez." Tom stared at the database information for a full 5 minutes before the implications hit him like a freight train. The woman next door had been mourning a living man while committing federal crimes in his memory. Here's where Tom's moral crisis got interesting. The guy knew that Teresa was planning something bigger. She'd been talking about a final justice ceremony and had mentioned hiring a tow truck for what she called legitimate property recovery. He also knew that if she followed through on her plans, she'd be committing federal crimes that would land her in prison for years. But telling her the truth about Mark would destroy every belief she'd held on to for 3 years of grief. Tom spent the next 2 days wearing a groove in his carpet and going through enough hand rags to stock a mechanic shop, trying to decide whether truth or mercy was the more compassionate choice. The community dynamic was shifting in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Mrs. Davis had started making pointed comments about people who don't know the whole story and how some folks in law enforcement deserve more respect than they get. Maria's guilty purse clutching had become so obvious that even Teresa noticed, though she interpreted it as nervous support for their legal battle rather than the crushing weight of embezzlement guilt it actually was. Officer Parker was dealing with his own crisis of confidence, knowing that this situation was beyond his training, but not wanting to admit he needed help from federal authorities. Meanwhile, I was walking a tightrope between my duty as a federal employee and my cover as a simple contractor. Every morning brought new evidence of Teresa's escalating behavior, more fake legal documents, increasingly elaborate plans for property seizure, and now evidence of her practicing these seizure speeches in front of Mark's memorial shrine. The woman would stand there at 2 in the morning morning, rehearsing what she'd say, then she finally took possession of what she believed was rightfully hers. Tom's cameras caught these practice sessions, and watching a grieving woman prepare to commit federal crimes for a dead man who wasn't actually dead was like watching a Greek tragedy unfold in suburban America. The viral element started small. Tom's overnight footage of Teresa's vandalism practice, yes, she practiced on a neighbor's car the night before attacking mine, got shared in the neighborhood message group as weird behavior alert. But something about a woman in pajamas methodically destroying property while talking to invisible spirits struck people as both tragic and darkly funny. The video got shared beyond our neighborhood, picking up comments like Karen thinks she's divinely chosen, and suburban grief spiral caught on camera. Within 48 hours, Teresa's midnight confession to my SUV had been viewed by thousands of people who had no idea they were watching someone destroy their life in real time. Let me tell you what was going through my head during all this. 25 years of federal service teaches you to recognize when someone's about to cross a line they can't uncross. Teresa was building up to something big, something public, and something that would land her in federal prison if I didn't find a way to intervene. But my agency protocols required me to maintain cover until the subject committed a clear federal crime with undeniable evidence. I was essentially watching a woman walk toward a cliff while being legally prohibited from grabbing her arm until she actually jumped. The breaking point was coming fast. Teresa had booked a tow truck for what she called a community property recovery event, created live stream accounts to document her legal victory over government corruption, and started inviting local media to witness what she believed would be vindication of her 3-year fight for justice. She was planning to commit multiple federal felonies in front of as large an audience as possible, all while genuinely believing she was performing a righteous act that would honor her husband's memory. Tom was holding the evidence that could save Teresa from federal prison, but showing her would destroy everything she believed about love, loss, and the man she'd been mourning for 3 years. Would you tell someone their entire grief was built on a lie, knowing it might break them completely? Let me know in the comments what you think Tom should do, because what happened next would shock everyone who was watching. Tom's moral crisis was eating him alive, and I could see it in every nervous hand wipe and sleepless night he was having. The guy had stumbled onto information that would either save Teresa from the biggest mistake of her life, or destroy her sanity completely. Mark Evans wasn't just alive. He was thriving in Mexico under a new identity, probably laughing about how he'd convinced his wife to commit federal crimes in his memory while he lived off stolen contractor money. But Tom knew that revealing this truth would shatter Teresa's entire worldview right before she was about to live stream what she believed was her moment of divine justice. Meanwhile, Teresa was orchestrating what she genuinely believed would be the most righteous moment of her life. She had spent the last of her embezzled community funds. Yes, Maria's purse-clutching guilt was about $15,000 that had disappeared from HOA accounts over 18 months, on hiring a tow truck driver and creating what looked like professional legal documentation. The woman had convinced herself that she was about to expose government corruption on a scale that would vindicate every widow who'd ever been denied justice by federal bureaucracy. She'd created social media accounts specifically for this event, promoted it as community property recovery when citizens fight back, and was expecting thousands of people to witness her triumph over the federal employee who'd been illegally occupying her compensation vehicle. The viral buildup was organic in that terrifying way that only internet drama can achieve. Tom's security footage of Teresa's midnight property destruction had already been viewed by 50,000 people, shared with comments ranging from sympathy for her grief to mockery of her divine mission delusion. Local news stations had picked up the story as a human interest piece about HOA conflicts, though none of them understood they were actually documenting the buildup to multiple federal crimes. Teresa interpreted this attention as validation that her cause was righteous, that the community and beyond supported her fight against government overreach. What Teresa didn't understand was that she was walking into a trap of her own making. Every social media post she made about reclaiming stolen property was evidence of premeditation. Every fake legal document she created was proof of fraud. Every dollar of community money she spent on this legal battle was embezzlement with a clear paper trail. The woman was building her own federal case with the thoroughness of a prosecutor, all while believing she was gathering evidence of government corruption that would justify her actions. Officer Parker was dealing with his own version of mission creep. What started as a simple neighborhood dispute had become something that clearly needed federal involvement, but admitting that would mean acknowledging he was in over his head. The guy wanted a federal law enforcement career so badly he could taste it, and part of him thought that handling the situation properly might be his audition tape for bigger agencies. But another part of him knew that one phone call to the right federal office would take this case out of his hands entirely, and with it, his chance to prove he belonged in the big leagues. Mrs. Davis was playing her own quiet game, dropping hints about federal employee protection protocols and making comments about how some people don't realize who they're really dealing with. The woman had 40 years of federal service under her belt and could spot a federal employee from across a parking lot, which meant she'd recognize something about me that the others had missed. But she was also enough of a professional to know that blowing someone's operational cover could put them in danger. So she limited herself to protective gestures and knowing smiles that said, "I see you, and I've got your back." Maria's guilt was reaching critical mass. The woman couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't look at Teresa's shrine to Mark without thinking about how community money had paid for the candles and flowers that surrounded his fake memorial. $15,000 might not sound like much to federal investigators, but to a small neighborhood association, it represented years of landscaping budgets and emergency repairs that would never happen. Maria knew that when the truth came out, and at this point, it was when, not if, the entire community would know she'd been complicit in funding Teresa's descent into federal criminal behavior. The live stream setup was becoming a professional production. Teresa had recruited neighbors to serve as legal witnesses to her property recovery, hired what she believed was a legitimate legal observer to document the proceedings, and even arranged for local media coverage of what she was calling a victory for citizens' rights against government overreach. She'd practiced her speech dozens of times in front of Mark's memorial, rehearsing the moment when she would drive away in what she believed was rightfully hers, while the community cheered her courage in standing up to federal authority. Here's what was really getting to me: Teresa's complete conviction that she was about to become a hero. This wasn't a woman who knew she was breaking the law and didn't care. This was someone who genuinely believed she was about to strike a blow for justice that would inspire other victims of government overreach. She'd created an entire mythology around this moment, where she would expose the truth about federal corruption, reclaim property that had been stolen from grieving families, and prove that ordinary citizens could fight back against a system designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the innocent. The technical preparation for her live stream was surprisingly sophisticated. Teresa had figured out multi-camera angles, backup streaming platforms in case her main account got shut down, and even created promotional materials that made her property recovery event look like a legitimate legal proceeding. She'd studied enough legal language to make her fake documents sound convincing to people who weren't lawyers, and she'd researched enough property law to create talking points that would sound reasonable to viewers who didn't understand federal vehicle regulations. Tom's decision point was approaching fast. He had footage of Mark Evans alive and well in Mexico, living under his new identity and apparently doing quite well for himself with whatever money he'd managed to steal and launder through his fake death. But he also had a front row seat to Teresa's preparation for what she believed would be the most important day of her life. The woman was planning to commit multiple federal felonies while live streaming to thousands of viewers, all in memory of a husband who was probably going to watch her destruction from his comfortable Mexican retirement while sipping drinks paid for with money she didn't know he'd stolen. The perfect storm was assembling, with the kind of inevitability that makes federal investigators both fascinated and horrified. You had a grieving widow planning to commit federal crimes for a husband who wasn't dead, a federal employee maintaining operational cover while watching felonies unfold in real time, a former contractor who knew enough about federal operations to spot problems but not enough about federal law to understand the full consequences, a retired federal employee trying to provide protection without blowing anyone's cover, and a rural cop desperately hoping this would be his ticket to the big leagues. All of this was building toward a live stream event that thousands of people would witness, creating the kind of viral content that investigators dream about for evidence purposes and human beings have nightmares about for moral reasons. The community dynamics were reaching their own breaking point. Neighbors who'd initially supported Teresa's fight for justice were starting to realize that her behavior had crossed lines that made everyone uncomfortable. The midnight property destruction, the obvious mental health crisis, and the increasingly elaborate legal theater were creating the kind of neighborhood tension that makes people start looking at real estate websites. But Teresa interpreted any hesitation or concern as evidence that people had been intimidated by federal authority, which only strengthened her resolve to prove that ordinary citizens could fight back successfully. But here's what no one expected. Not Teresa, not the 15,000 viewers who had signed up for her live stream, not even Tom, who thought he knew the whole story. I was about to drop not one, but two truth bombs that would make Teresa's breakdown the most legendary meltdown in internet history. Which revelation do you think hit her harder, learning I was a federal chief, or discovering what her husband had really been doing all these years? The morning of Teresa's divine property recovery event arrived with that crisp autumn clarity that makes everything look like it's been filmed through an Instagram filter. By 7:30 a.m., my quiet suburban street had transformed into something between a block party and a public execution, with Teresa orchestrating what she genuinely believed would be the most righteous moment in modern American history. The woman had dressed like she was attending both a funeral and a wedding, black dress, pearl necklace, and the kind of determined expression that suggested she was about to either save the world or destroy it completely. Tom was pacing his front yard like a caged animal, that nervous hand wiping now, accompanied by what looked like actual sweating through his third shirt of the morning. The guy was clutching his phone with Mark's database information like it contained nuclear launch codes, and honestly, honestly, given what that information was about to do to Teresa's psyche, that might not have been far from the truth. Mrs. Davis had positioned herself on her front porch with the strategic precision of someone who'd spent 40 years knowing when federal employees needed backup, even if they couldn't ask for it directly. Officer Parker had arrived early, his military bearing even more pronounced than usual, as he surveyed what was clearly going to be either the most satisfying arrest of his career or the most spectacular mental health crisis he'd ever witnessed. Maria showed up looking like she was attending her own execution, that guilty purse-clutching now accompanied by the kind of pale, sweaty desperation that comes from knowing your financial crimes are about to become very public very quickly. The neighborhood turnout was incredible. Teresa had promoted this event so heavily on social media that people from 3 different zip codes had shown up to watch what they thought would be either the most satisfying moment of community justice or the most entertaining breakdown they'd ever seen in person. She'd set up folding tables for her fake legal documents, positioned multiple cameras for optimal live stream coverage, and even created what looked like a professional legal proceeding, complete with designated seating for witnesses. Ladies and gentlemen, Teresa announced to her growing live stream audience, her voice carrying that absolute confidence that comes from believing God is personally directing your actions. Today we witness what happens when ordinary citizens refuse to be intimidated by federal corruption. The comments were flying across her stream faster than anyone could read them. 15,000 people were tuning in to watch what they thought would be either epic justice or epic failure, and the energy was building like a hurricane making landfall. I was in my driveway washing my SUV, playing my role as the confused contractor who had no idea he was about to become the star of the most watched federal crime in social media history. But internally, I was running through every protocol I'd learned in 25 years of federal service about when to break operational cover, how to minimize collateral damage, and what kind of evidence would hold up in federal court when this inevitable disaster reached prosecution. By authority of divine compensation order, Teresa declared, approaching my SUV with a crowbar that looked like it had been purchased specifically for this moment, and a folder full of documents that would have been impressive if they hadn't been completely fabricated. The live stream chat was going absolutely insane. 18,000 viewers were now watching in real time as a suburban widow prepared to commit multiple federal felonies while explaining to the internet how she was striking a blow for justice against government corruption. She began prying at my car door while delivering what sounded like a prepared speech about federal employees and contractors being part of a machine designed to destroy American families and then hide behind bureaucratic immunity. Her performance was passionate, articulate, and completely detached from reality, which made it both compelling television and a genuinely heartbreaking human tragedy. The woman was broadcasting her psychological breakdown to thousands of strangers who were treating it like entertainment. Here's where I had to make the call that ended Teresa's delusions and probably saved her from even worse federal charges. Everyone watching this needs to understand, I announced to the live stream audience, my voice carrying the kind of calm authority that comes from dealing with people who've crossed federal lines they don't understand. She's committing federal crimes right now. The chat exploded with confusion and excitement as viewers tried to figure out why this supposedly helpless contractor suddenly sounded like law enforcement giving official warnings. Teresa paused mid-crowbar swing, something in my tone finally penetrating the divine mission focus that had been driving her behavior for weeks. That's when I pulled out my federal badge and credentials, holding them up to the cameras that were broadcasting this moment to 22,000 people who were about to witness the plot twist of the decade. I am Chief Larry Roberts, Federal Interior Department, I continued, watching Teresa's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as the implications crashed over her like a tsunami of federal consequences. The silence that followed was the kind of perfect dramatic pause that you can't script. 25,000 people holding their collective breath while Teresa processed that she'd been planning to steal a car from someone who had the authority to investigate her husband's disappearance, and probably knew more about Mark Evans than she did. Her crowbar clattered to the asphalt as her entire worldview began collapsing in real time, broadcast to an audience that was loving every second of her psychological destruction. Federal Chief? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the excited chattering of 28,000 people who just witnessed the reveal they'd been hoping for without knowing it. Oh my God! Oh my God! And the woman was experiencing complete cognitive dissonance. Everything she believed about me, about her mission, about her righteous fight against government corruption was being rewritten faster than her mind could process the new information. But Tom knew this was his moment to either save Teresa from herself or destroy what remained of her sanity. Teresa, he called out, his nervous energy finally channeling into decisive action as he held up his phone with the evidence he'd been carrying like a burden for days. Your husband Mark isn't dead. The live stream chat absolutely lost whatever coherence it had maintained as 30,000 viewers tried to process what they'd just heard, while Teresa stood frozen between her dropped crowbar and a truth that was about to rewrite 3 years of her life. He's alive in Mexico, Tom continued, his voice strong with the relief of finally purging a secret that had been eating him alive. Living under the name Marco Valdez with money he stole before faking his death. The sound Teresa made when both revelations hit her simultaneously was unlike anything I've ever heard from a human being. It was grief and rage and disbelief and betrayal all compressed into a single wail that carried across the neighborhood and probably damaged the audio equipment of every person recording this moment. "Mark is alive," she screamed, her voice breaking on each word as her mind tried to process the impossible mathematics of being told that her 3 years of mourning had been based on an elaborate lie designed to let her husband escape with stolen money while she honored his fake memory with increasingly criminal behavior. "Federal Chief, Mark alive? God, why?" The woman was experiencing what psychologists call an acute dissociative crisis, which is clinical language for having your entire reality rewritten in front of 35,000 strangers. "Teresa, I investigated Mark's case 3 years ago," I said, trying to make my voice as gentle as possible while still being audible to the microphones that were capturing every word of this confession. "I knew he faked his death. You were a victim of his scam too." The live stream comments were moving too fast to read, but I caught fragments of viewer reactions that ranged from "plot twist of the century" to "this is better than Netflix" to "Karen got scammed by her own dead husband." The triple revelation, federal chief, investigated husband, husband alive, was more than Teresa's mind could handle at once. She sat down hard on my driveway, staring at nothing while trying to process that she'd been committing federal crimes against the very person who could have told her the truth about her husband's disappearance, and that the man she'd been mourning and honoring with increasingly elaborate criminal schemes had been living comfortably in another country while she destroyed her life in his memory. "Mark scammed me too," she finally managed to say, her voice hollow with the kind of shock that comes from learning that your entire grief process was based on lies told by someone you trusted completely. "I've been mourning a living person? Committed federal crimes for lie?" Officer Parker was approaching with handcuffs, but even he seemed reluctant to arrest someone who was clearly experiencing a complete psychological collapse on live stream in front of what was now 40,000 viewers. That's when Maria decided this was the moment to purge her own secret and complete Teresa's catastrophic education about how thoroughly she'd been betrayed by everyone she'd trusted. "Teresa," Maria announced, no longer clutching that guilty purse now that the truth was finally coming out, "you also embezzled $15,000 from our community fund while mourning your husband, who was spending stolen money in Mexico." The live stream chat completely lost whatever remaining coherence it had possessed, as viewers tried to process that Teresa had committed federal crimes, community embezzlement, and destroyed 3 years of her life, all for a man who had faked his own death to escape with money he had stolen from both the government and her. Teresa's arrest was probably the gentlest federal crime takedown in law enforcement history. She offered no resistance as Officer Parker handcuffed her. She was so psychologically shattered that she seemed barely aware of what was happening around her. "Mark's alive! Mark's alive!" she kept repeating like a broken recording, her voice carrying the kind of hollow disbelief that comes from learning that your entire worldview was constructed around elaborate lies designed to benefit someone who didn't care about the collateral damage to your life. 45,000 people had just witnessed the most complete psychological destruction in internet history. Watching a woman learn simultaneously that her dead husband was alive, that she'd been committing federal crimes against someone who'd investigated his fake death, and that her entire 3-year grief process had been based on lies told by someone who was probably going to read about her federal charges while enjoying drinks paid for with money he'd stolen from her. But Teresa's nightmare was just beginning, because when federal investigators dug deeper into Mark's case, they discovered something that would make his betrayal even more twisted. What do you think they found that made even seasoned federal agents shake their heads in disbelief? Comment below, because the truth about Mark was darker than anyone imagined, and it would change how we all saw Teresa's story forever. The federal investigation that followed Teresa's live stream breakdown was like watching a carefully choreographed dance between multiple agencies that normally don't play well together. Within 48 hours of her arrest, I had investigators from the Department of the Interior's Office of Inspector General, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and Homeland Security sitting in my living room, all trying to figure out how a suburban HOA dispute had turned into an international manhunt with embezzlement charges and 35,000 witnesses. The Teresa Evans case had become what federal prosecutors call a perfect storm. Multiple jurisdictions, clear video evidence, international fugitive recovery, and enough media attention to make everyone's career if they handled it right. Teresa's psychiatric evaluation became the linchpin of her entire federal case. You can't prosecute someone for federal crimes if they're not mentally competent to understand what they did wrong. And watching Teresa try to process that, her entire 3-year grieving process had been based on an elaborate lie, was like watching someone's brain break in real time. The federal psychologist assigned to her case described her condition as grief-induced dissociative disorder with reality processing dysfunction, which is clinical speak for, this woman's husband convinced her he was dead while he stole everything she owned, and now she can't figure out what's real anymore. The evaluation took 6 weeks because Teresa kept insisting that the whole thing was an elaborate federal conspiracy to discredit her righteous mission. Tom's transformation from nervous neighbor to local hero was something to watch. The guy went from compulsively wiping his hands every 5 minutes to giving interviews to federal training academies about how to recognize when someone's dangerous behavior is being driven by misinformation rather than genuine malice. His decision to reveal Mark's fake death when he did probably saved Teresa from additional federal charges, because attempted vehicle theft carries a much lighter sentence than completed vehicle theft with interstate transportation. The federal investigators were so impressed by his evidence gathering and moral decision-making under pressure that they offered him consulting contracts for future cases involving emotionally unstable subjects. Mrs. Davis finally got the recognition she deserved for being the quiet professional in this entire mess. Turns out she'd been documenting everything from day one, maintaining careful records of Teresa's escalating behavior, while providing strategic protection for me without compromising my operational cover. 40 years of federal service had taught her exactly how to support a fellow federal employee under threat, while maintaining plausible deniability about what she knew and when she knew it. The Department of the Interior gave her a civilian commendation for exceptional support to federal personnel in operational circumstances, which was their way of saying, thank you for keeping our guy alive while he was being stalked by a crazy person. Officer Parker got his federal career dreams fulfilled, though probably not in the way he'd originally imagined. His professional handling of an increasingly complex situation had caught the attention of federal recruiters, who were impressed by his ability to manage multiple jurisdictional issues without screwing up the evidence chain. The Federal Law Enforcement Training Center accepted him into an accelerated program for experienced local officers, and within 8 months, he was working federal cases involving threats to government employees. His first assignment was training local police departments on how to recognize when domestic disputes involve federal personnel or property. Maria's redemption story was probably the most satisfying part of this whole disaster. Once federal investigators understood that her embezzlement had been more about keeping community functions running, while Teresa was diverting legitimate funds to finance her grief-driven legal theater, Maria became a witness rather than a co-defendant. She testified against Teresa, not out of revenge, but out of genuine concern for someone who'd been systematically manipulated by a master con artist. The federal victim services people were so impressed by how she'd handled being caught between loyalty and truth that they recruited her to help other communities identify similar financial manipulation schemes. The expanded investigation into Mark Evans revealed criminal behavior that made Teresa's property destruction look like a parking ticket by comparison. This man hadn't just faked his death to escape a messy marriage. He'd been running a sophisticated financial fraud operation that involved multiple government contracts, money laundering through fake construction companies, and using his supposed death to trigger life insurance payouts that Teresa never received. Federal investigators found evidence that Mark had been systematically emptying their joint accounts, their retirement funds, and even the small inheritance Teresa had received from her parents, all while planning his elaborate disappearance to Mexico. Mark's capture was almost embarrassingly easy once federal investigators figured out his pattern of financial behavior. The man had been living in Guadalajara under the name Marco Valdez, running what appeared to be a legitimate construction business with startup capital that happened to match the exact amount stolen from various federal contracts. His mistake was maintaining the same spending patterns he'd had when married to Teresa: expensive cars, luxury apartments, and a lifestyle that attracted attention from Mexican banking authorities who cooperate with American federal investigations. When they arrested him on a visa violation, his first concern wasn't Teresa's well-being or remorse for what his deception had cost her. It was whether the federal government could seize his Mexican assets. The international cooperation required to extradite Mark became a case study in how financial crimes cross borders in ways that make everyone's life complicated. Mexican authorities were cooperative once they understood that Mark had essentially committed fraud against both American taxpayers and his own wife, but the legal paperwork required to bring him back to face federal charges took months of coordination between agencies that normally don't talk to each other. The State Department got involved, the Treasury Department wanted its money back, and the Department of Justice had to coordinate with Mexican prosecutors who wanted assurance that Mark would face appropriate consequences for his crimes. Teresa's trial became a media sensation, partly because of the live stream's breakdown that had been viewed by millions of people, and partly because her case highlighted the psychological complexities of being victimized by someone you've trusted completely for decades. Federal prosecutors had to balance Teresa's genuine victimization by Mark's fraud against her very real crimes against federal property and her embezzlement of community funds. The prosecution team included victim services specialists who worked to ensure that Teresa understood she was being held accountable for her actions, while acknowledging that those actions had been influenced by elaborate manipulation. The sentences reflected the complicated nature of everyone's criminal behavior and mental state. Teresa received 18 months in federal prison with credit for time served, plus $25,000 in restitution, and 3 years of supervised probation probation that included mandatory psychological counseling and financial management education. The judge acknowledged that her criminal behavior had been driven by grief and manipulation rather than simple greed, but emphasized that being victimized by someone else doesn't excuse committing federal crimes. Mark received 5 years in federal prison, plus full restitution for both government losses and personal theft from Teresa, with additional time for the elaborate fake death scheme that had enabled his wife's criminal behavior. The community's response to these revelations was complex and emotionally charged. Neighbors who'd initially supported Teresa's fight against what they perceived as government corruption had to grapple with the reality that she'd been victimized into believing a completely false narrative about federal employees and their families. The $15,000 in community funds that Teresa had embezzled was repaid through federal restitution programs designed to help communities recover from fraud, but the emotional damage to neighborhood trust and cohesion took much longer to repair than anyone had anticipated. Federal investigators began using Teresa's case as a training example for recognizing sophisticated financial fraud that targets emotional vulnerabilities in both institutional and personal relationships. Mark's manipulation scheme was textbook. Create a crisis that explains financial irregularities, fake your death to avoid accountability, and let your victims' grief prevent them from asking the kinds of questions that might expose inconsistencies in your story. The psychological profiles developed from this case helped federal agencies identify similar patterns in other investigations involving missing contractors and suspicious death claims. But Teresa's nightmare was just beginning, because when federal investigators dug deeper into Mark's case, they discovered something that would make his betrayal even more twisted. What do you think they found that made even seasoned federal agents shake their heads in disbelief? Comment below, because the truth about Mark was darker than anyone imagined, and it would change how we all saw Teresa's story forever. 18 months later, Teresa Evans was released from federal prison to a world that had moved on without her. But the neighborhood where she'd committed her federal crimes had transformed in ways that would make anyone believe in cosmic justice. Her foreclosed house had been purchased by a Coast Guard officer and his wife, who worked as a civilian contractor for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Their driveway now hosted 2 federal vehicles where Teresa's shrine to fake dead Mark had once stood, and they'd installed a tasteful American flag display where she used to practice her property seizure speeches. The daily routine of riding the city bus past her former neighborhood became Teresa's most consistent reminder of how completely her life had changed. Every morning on her way to her minimum wage job at a document scanning company, the only employment she could find with federal felony convictions on her record, she watched federal employees start their cars, check their mail, and live the normal suburban lives that she'd convinced herself were part of some vast conspiracy against grieving widows. The new owners of her house had even installed a small garden where Mark's memorial had been, planted with flowers that bloomed year-round as a symbol of life continuing rather than remaining frozen in fabricated grief. Tom had become something of a celebrity in federal contractor circles, known as the guy who prevented a federal employee from being seriously injured by someone experiencing a complete psychological break. His nervous hand-wiping had disappeared entirely once he'd purged the secret about Mark's fake death, and he parlayed his experience into a consulting business helping government agencies identify potential security risks from emotionally unstable contractors or neighbors. His Ring camera footage of Teresa's breakdown was now used in federal employee security training as an example of how quickly domestic disputes can escalate into federal crimes. Mrs. Davis had taken on an unofficial role as the neighborhood's federal employee protection coordinator, using her decades of experience to help other government workers integrate into suburban communities without attracting the kind of dangerous attention that had nearly destroyed Teresa's life. She'd organized monthly barbecues specifically for federal families, created resource guides for dealing with anti-government sentiment, and maintained a quiet network of retired federal employees who could provide advice and support when local tensions arose. Officer Parker was thriving in his new career with federal law enforcement, specializing in cases that involved financial fraud targeting government employees and contractors. His experience managing Teresa's breakdown while maintaining evidence integrity had impressed his superiors enough that he was fast-tracked through training programs, usually reserved for agents with advanced degrees. He still occasionally drove through his old patrol area, now as a federal agent, and he always made a point of checking on the neighborhood, where he'd learned that local police work could have national implications. Maria had become a poster child for financial fraud recovery, speaking at community meetings and government conferences about how sophisticated con artists target both institutions and individuals simultaneously. Her experience with Teresa's embezzlement had taught her to recognize the warning signs of financial manipulation, and she'd helped identify similar schemes in 3 other communities. The guilt that had once made her clutch her purse like a security blanket had been replaced by confidence that came from turning her worst experience into a tool for protecting others. The most satisfying element of this entire story's resolution was watching how Mark Evans adjusted to federal prison life. His cellmates weren't impressed by his elaborate fake death scheme. Financial fraud is common in white-collar prison units, but destroying your wife's mental health while stealing her inheritance money for your comfortable retirement makes you the kind of inmate that even other criminals find morally reprehensible. His daily routine included cleaning federal government vehicles as part of the prison's work program, a detail that federal prosecutors had specifically requested as poetic justice for the crimes that had been committed against my SUV. Teresa's attempts to rebuild her life were hampered by the internet's long memory and the viral nature of her breakdown. Her live-streamed discovery that her dead husband was alive had been viewed more than 5 million times across various platforms, spawned countless reaction videos and memes, and made her recognizable to strangers who would point and whisper when they saw her on public transportation. Job applications were exercises in futility when potential employers could simply search her name and find detailed accounts of her federal crimes, complete with audio and videos evidence of her psychological breakdown. The financial restitution process had wiped out every asset Teresa had accumulated during her marriage, including the house she believed was paid for with Mark's legitimate contractor earnings. Federal investigators had determined that nearly everything in her life had been purchased with money that Mark had stolen from various sources, making her both a victim of his fraud and an unwitting beneficiary of his crimes. The mathematical precision of federal asset recovery meant that Teresa ended up with exactly what she contributed to the marriage through her own legitimate employment, which, after 18 years as a part-time retail worker, wasn't enough to rent a studio apartment in the neighborhood where she'd once owned a 4-bedroom house. The community had evolved beyond Teresa's absence, developing new traditions that subtly honored the lesson her breakdown had taught about the dangers of letting grief overcome rational judgment. The annual neighborhood barbecue now included a moment of recognition for federal employees and their families, acknowledging the service that people like me provide, while also recognizing that we're human beings with lives and problems that don't deserve to be targeted by people who've been victimized by others. It was a mature response to a situation that had brought out both the worst and best impulses in everyone involved. My own life had settled into a routine that was both more cautious and more rewarding than before Teresa's intervention. The promotion that came from handling a complex federal crime case with minimal collateral damage had moved me to a position with better security protocols and more interesting challenges. The neighborhood dynamics had improved dramatically. Having your federal law enforcement credentials publicly verified in front of 30,000 witnesses tends to discourage future harassment from people who might otherwise see government employees as acceptable targets. The phone call that ended this story came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 years after Teresa's first demand for my compensation card. Chief Roberts, we have another HOA harassment case involving someone claiming divine authority over a federal employee's vehicle. The suspect says God told her the car belongs to her deceased husband. I laughed out loud, which probably wasn't the professional response my caller was expecting. Are we sure the husband is actually dead this time? I asked. Send Tom Riley to verify. He's become our expert on fake death detection. Some people never learn that before demanding someone give you their car, especially if it has government plates. You should probably verify that your divine mission isn't based on lies told by someone who's still alive and spending your money in another country. Here at Echo Stories, we believe that every wild tale like this one echoes a deeper truth about human nature and the consequences of our choices. If this incredible journey of federal justice served ice cold brightened your day, smash that like button to let me know you enjoyed the ride. Thanks for joining me for another unbelievable story, and I'll see you next time when we explore another mind-blowing tale that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. Until then, keep listening for those echoes of justice in your own life.